Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our Inequality and Equity conversation here on More Radio Network. My name is Dr. Anissa McNeil, and I'm so pleased to have you with us tonight as we dive into this topic of police reform. We want to spend some time and tell you what is the catalyst for having this radio program here at such a pivotal time in our history. One, I developed this radio show to answer the question of how. Now that we're at this tipping point in America, how do we systematically unpack systematic racism? So, in our community, when everyone is wondering, well, okay, police brutality is not new. Brutality has been here since the onset of our police department. So why are we still talking about it in 2020? How can we change the systemic racism in our police department? And so instead of us having this conversation in which many people just begin to get confused, we want to take a moment and unpack it layer by layer by layer. And in that unpacking, I want to begin with a very brief YouTube video that goes over the history of our police department in the United States. Let's take a listen.
Images of police officers from all over the country for 9 days now responding to these demonstrations and these protests nationwide. But did you know there was a time when we as a country, America, did not have an organized police force anywhere in the entire country? So let's go beyond the headline this morning and take a look at the history of the police force in America. The law enforcement system we have today wasn't shaped until the mid-1950s. Back in colonial times, there were no police officers. Communities would simply hire someone to act as night watch. It wasn't very effective. Most of the time, the watchman would sleep through his shift or get drunk. The first time we saw an organized law enforcement system was just before the Civil War. Cities set up what they called a slave patrol, a group to prevent slave revolts and hunt down runaway slaves. After the war, these groups switched more to enforcing segregation. And as time went on, police forces focused mostly on protecting businesses in big cities from union organizers and crime rings. The problem? Police forces were controlled by local politicians. In 1929, President Hoover created the Wickersham Commission to look at how effective law enforcement was nationwide. The results of that commission led to the creation of independent police precincts that were separate from political parties and are more similar to what we have today. All right, over the last year, CBS News has surveyed more than 150 police departments across the country. At least 69% of departments that were surveyed said they do have racial bias training, including the Minneapolis Police Department. They said they've been teaching bias training since 2015 and de-escalation training since before 2005.
So now we can hear how our police department got started, and that our police, since 2015, they have all been trained on de-escalation and bias. They've all received biasing training. And to that end, I want to bring our listening audience up to date. You know, last week, while we were here on our collective conversation show, we had a conversation about qualified immunity. And we talked about that on that Monday, they were taking qualified immunity to Congress. And here we have an article by Vox that was published by Ella Nielsen that was published on June 8th, 2020. And this article states that the Democrats' sweeping new police reform bill explained here in her article in Vox. And our Democratic elected officials have introduced the Justice in Policing Act of 2020. And this is an act that its biggest provision seeks to end qualified immunity. It's a thorny, the author writes, it's a thorny legal issue that gives police officers and other public officials broad immunity from civil lawsuits. The U.S. Supreme Court, which has upheld the quality immunity doctrine in past rulings, is currently deciding whether to hear arguments next term in a case challenging qualified immunity. Additionally, proposed by Senator Cory Booker, that would create a new national registry. This legislation, Justice in Policing Act of 2020, would also create a new national registry to track the misconduct of police officers, repeat offenders that move from department to department. It would also ban the use of chokeholds and certain no-knock warrants. I wanted to drill down a little bit into what they meant by certain no-knock warrants, but I wasn't able to do that. So if you're able to, in our listening audience, if you're able to obtain this article by Vox, published on June 8th, 2020 by Ella Nielsen and Lee Zong. They reviewed the Democratic new bill introduced on the 8th, Justice in Policing Act of 2020. Now that brings us up to date with where we are at this current time in regards to our conversation. And I'd like to take this moment to introduce to you our distinguished guests that are going to join us this afternoon. We're going to start with Dr. Ivy. Dr. Ivy, can you introduce yourself to our listening audience?
Good evening, good afternoon, and hello to everyone. My name is Dr. Ray Ivy. I'm an educator. I'm working with education, working with young people since 1998. Specifically now, working helping new teachers understand trauma-informed instruction, mathematics instruction, and working inside of urban school districts. Currently based here in DC area.
Okay, and Dr. Annette Morton.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Annette Morton, and I am a higher education administrator and I'm a community organizer focusing on women's leadership issues, and I'm based here in Long Beach, California.
Hi, welcome, Annette. So nice to have you, Dr. Morton. And yes, Dr. Walker.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Dr. Amanda Seon Walker. I am a licensed clinical psychologist here in California, based in Los Angeles. And I work with the Mental Health and Social Justice Clinic with clients who primarily have addressed some kind of deep trauma.
All right, and we have another distinguished guest, Ms. Kenyatta Bakir.
Thank you, Anissa. My name is Kenyatta Bakir, and I've been in education, specifically early childhood education, for the last 28 years. I have opened my own preschool at one juncture, also a charter school and an Islamic school. But currently, I am a college professor teaching child development, as well as a senior trainer and board member with Muslim Anti-Racism Collaborative. That does anti-bias and anti-racism workshops and works directly also with different interfaith spaces to continue that work. And lastly, I'm a Black Lives Matter member, and I'm based in Los Angeles.
Wonderful. Good evening, Kenyatta, and welcome. Welcome.
Thank you.
Miss Jamel, or should I say Dr. Jamel Patterson.
Hi, I'm Dr. Jamel Patterson. I'm a retired emergency medicine physician from Harlem Hospital in New York. I'm president of the Galloway Foundation International that we serve in Eastern Africa and the Caribbean with economic empowerment, providing education, supporting school for education, providing clean water, nutrition, and whatever thing that may be needed. We try to empower them that they can continue the work that's needed.
Wonderful. Dr. Patterson, your volume is coming in and out. So we're going to have some technical issues with that. We're going to fix that in a little bit. I want to introduce Dr. Linda Galloway. She's on the phone with us. Dr. Galloway, welcome.
It's actually Burke.
Oh,
I'm Linda Burke.
yeah.
I'm a board-certified OBGYN physician. Been practicing OB for roughly 30 years. Practice was concentrated in medically underserved communities, and my passion is reducing maternal mortality for all pregnant women, but specifically as it relates to African-American pregnant women.
Wonderful. So nice to have you, Dr. Burke. And yes, we have Mr. Fred Shaw on the line with us. Mr. Shaw, Reverend Shaw.
What's happening, sister? What's going on?
Yeah, so lovely to have you with us this evening. Can you introduce yourself to our listening audience?
Yeah, I'm Reverend Frederick Shaw. I'm the executive director of the Inglewood South Bay NAACP. I'm a former law enforcement officer. I'm the past president of the Compton NAACP. I'm involved with a lot of groups in the community, authors, international speaker, so forth and so on.
Wonderful. So you can see, you can hear, listening audience, that we have a collective group of individuals from all over the country that have joined us tonight. I want to start our conversation. We're here tonight to talk about police brutality. I want to frame this conversation not only in a historical sense of how our police department began policing in the United States, but I also wanted to begin by a few statistics that were provided to us in an article by Tanica, published on February 22nd, 2017 by Louis Galloway. This particular author published 42 shocking police statistics. And in this article, she says, on average, in the United States, a police officer takes the life of a citizen every 7 hours. And that's reported by Fatal Encounters. Now, I want to go through a couple of statistics by the Department of Justice. The Department of Justice reports that 52% of police officers report that it is not unusual for a law enforcement official to turn a blind eye to improper conduct of other officers. 61% of police officers state that they do not always report serious abuse that has been directly observed by fellow officers. And lastly, the U.S. Department of Justice reports that 84% of police officers have stated in a recent survey that they have directly witnessed a fellow officer using more force than necessary. Now, we want to turn our statistics to Reverend Sean and I participate in this particular organization, to the NAACP. The NAACP report that out of 2.3 million people who are incarcerated in the United States right now, it's an estimated 1 million of them are African American, are Black. Lastly, let's go to one statistic by The Guardian and another one by Cop Crisis. So remember that our police department started as a slave catcher. Our policing in America started to catch slaves. So and I know we don't like to think about slavery this way, but I'm gonna frame it in the context in which it started in the United States. They started off catching property. We were not thought of as people. So they started off catching property. So I want you to think about policing as money. If you can put those two together, this is going to make sense to you. So I'm going to read this statistic by The Guardian. People who are African American are twice as likely to be killed by a police officer while being unarmed compared to a Caucasian or white. So what does that mean in case of dollars? The estimated cost of police brutality incidents in the United States is $1.8 billion.
Wow.
1.8 billion. So I want to ask our guest today, what do those statistics mean to you? Let's start with Dr. Morton.
Well, it's clear that, there's one statistic that I really want to add to this, and that's the police brutality against women, specifically Black women. It's clear, it's overlooked a lot, and it is seen, it just perpetuates the thought that Black women are invisible. And it's one of the reasons why the Say Her Name project was created, because it's attempting to bring women's issues and stories of police brutality to the forefront. So in the mix of all of the police brutality statistics that you mentioned, specifically women's issues need to be brought to the forefront as well. So that's just one of the things that I noticed that needs to be brought more into the conversation.
Absolutely. And we want to put this in a historical context. Now, you have to remember that our police, our slave catchers, were not immune to catching women slaves, children slaves, minors, little babies, using dogs as a part of the policing to catch a slave. If you follow me on Facebook, or if you follow any of my posts that I do on social media, you'll see that there was a popular postcard in the United States depicting lynching. And this postcard had 3 women, 2 children, and the rest of them were men. So when we talk about lynching, to your point, Dr. Morton, we are talking about the totality of our community. Lynching children, lynching women, lynching men. This was thought of as property. So now let's fast forward to 2020. Here we sit in June 2020. We have a Breonna Taylor. She was a nurse, a first responder, a no-knock warrant, and she is dead at the hands of the police. Is that not a modern day lynching? We have George Floyd. Is that not a modern day lynching? So we've got to talk about police brutality. As you hear those statistics, Dr. Patterson, what comes to your mind?
It just seems that I tried to check my mic. I hope it's not going in and out. It seems like things haven't changed. If that's the premise that it was started on, even with the training, this is 2020, and the foundation have not changed. They might have built on it. They might have tweaked some things here or there to make it modernized, but it doesn't seem that it has changed. If we know, when you look at police brutality, we're looking at George Floyd, which was the tipping point, but we have name after name, and I'm smiling to myself because when I graduated from college in 70s, and we were talking about police brutality. The same things hasn't changed. And if the foundation as it is has been that way, then I don't expect to see change unless the foundation has been broken, unless we break the foundation. And if we just tweaking here and there, we are going to get what we expect.
Exactly. This system works as it was intended to work. Right. If you listen to Oprah Winfrey's live town hall yesterday, she talks about systemic racism and how the system was built. This system was built not to serve and protect the African American community. It was built to do exactly what it is doing today. That's how come Dr. Patterson is talking about, wow, in the 70s, we talked about police brutality. Do you know in 1939, there was a big movement about police brutality against the African American community. In 1919, there was a big movement about police brutality in the African American community. In 1965, there was a big movement about police brutality in the African American community. Trayvon Martin, there was a big movement about the police department. We can go on and on and on. So how do we change this system? That's what we want to talk about tonight. We're going to take one last question on the statistics, and then I'm going to give one last statistics, and we're going to move to some policy changes and the how to change this systematic racism that is embedded into how the police department was constructed. Is there anyone of our distinguished guests that would like to make a comment on the statistics that we read or overviewed?
Yeah, I would.
Yes, Reverend Shaw.
Yeah, you have hit the key words, systemic, these things, the inherent racism. The thing is this, you mentioned that slave catchers were there. That comes down to today, where we see that white people are expected to comply, but Black people are expected to obey. These are two different things. Your children's friends can comply with your wishes. Your own children, you expect to obey. So just in the fact that they expect us to obey, it's like an ownership of us, that we don't have a say in the conversation. But if we're going to get to it, and to the people who are mental health on this, this is not an attack personally, but if we look at the history of racism in this country, starting with Dr. Benjamin Rush, who is the father of psychiatry, who said that Black people's skin was dark because we had a disease akin to leprosy, and that whites should stay away from us. And the only way to know if we were cured or if we were sane is if we turned white. When we ran away from our slave masters, during slavery time, he could give my wife to his friends, he could sell my children, he could rape me, maim me, castrate me. But if I ran away from those conditions, Dr. Samuel Cartwright said that I was mentally ill. So we come all the way through the Tuskegee, all of these things, and people absorb the sanctions from the authorities that allow them to get away with stuff. The reason that a lot of these law enforcement officers get away with what they get away with is because the upper brass, I don't care what they say, the upper brass allows it. So when you see a guy like Floyd get killed by a police officer who is in broad daylight with his knee on his neck, knowing people are filming him, and he smirks and rocks on the man's neck, this is part of the systemic racism that we're looking. And, that's what I also do as the spokesperson for the Citizens Commission on Human Rights. I go to Africa, I come here, I deal with these issues, because if we don't deal with the root, we will never, ever get to the fruit. So
that's what we're trying to get you today,
absolutely.
Shaw. And it's not just the guy with his knee on his neck. It's the three guys who watched it. It's the commanding officer who didn't call it in for being what it is. It's the watch commander who did not only not call it in, but the watch commander who made a false report of what actually happened at the scene until the video went out. It's the DA who would look at the charges and not think that there's enough data to file a charge. It's now this qualified immunity that says, oh, wow, now we're going to go a little bit deeper into the policy, because all police departments have this cooling off period. Did y'all know that? That whenever there is severe misconduct, the police unions have it written into your police contracts that your police officers get a cooling off period. Yeah, time to get the story right, time to get this story right. But before we go deep, I want to go deep. I want to go step by step so people can understand it, okay?
Right.
So we talked about those statistics, and you can easily look up what I just reported to you by the Department of Justice. Now I want to go to a different layer. Now that we know how the police department originated, what it was designed to do, be real clear when I tell you this, it's designed to do exactly what it is doing today. So is our criminal justice system. It is designed to do exactly what it's doing today. And that police department is designed in doing that. Just brutality alone comes out to, and this is according to Crop Crisis, comes out to $1.8 billion a year. 1.8 billion is what it cost us for police brutality. Remember, America brought us here for money. So every time I talk about America and us, I'm also going to talk about money, because if you don't talk about that, you're going to miss what's happening. So now let's jump right into the policy changes. But before we get there, I must tell you this one statistic that I have to tell you, this week has been difficult for me. Not only was it the funeral services of our beloved George Floyd, but it's also the tipping point of many things. In the African-American community, it's the tipping point on a health crisis. So we're still dying at an alarming rate from COVID-19. It's a tipping point of economic disparity. We are still experiencing a great economic disparity because of COVID-19. And on top of all of that, if that's not enough to keep you up at night or to make you think, on top of all of that, we are now considering how the color of our skin now engages us in a country where our ancestors' blood, sweat, and tears built this nation. So if our forefathers, if our ancestors built this nation, why are we still in a foreign land? That's something to consider. But this statistic, I'm sorry, you guys, that's real. This statistic really made me ponder. In 2019, the police killed 1,098 people at the hands of the police. And if you tie that to our statistic that we just read earlier on this program, that says that African Americans are twice as likely to be killed by the police. So then you take that statistic and you divide it by 2, and that's us. That's us. Mm-hmm. And that's us that's reported. So I really want to frame this. Because if we don't frame it and put it in a manner where people can say, well, what are you talking about? Are you talking about one George Floyd? Are you talking about one Breonna Taylor? Are you talking about 1 year? Did this just happen this year? I'm trying to understand it. So I'm trying to help you understand it. We're not talking about 1 year. We're talking about systemic racism from the origin of the police department to where we are today. So now let's get to the how. Let's get to the how. This was a beautiful, how do we improve the systemic racism that exists today in the police department? How can we breathe in America? How can we get the police knees off of our neck? So now let's talk about the how. I'm excited as we get into the 8, can't wait. And I'm excited as we get into Dennis Black. There was a viewing on Fox 2 in Detroit after the murder of George Floyd. Fox 2 interviewed Dennis Black. And if you don't know who Dennis Black is a political consultant and former National Law Guild board member. And if you look at his comments on that station, he talked about that he purports that we need a comprehensive way of how police brutality happens on a policy level. So there he's talking about on the policy level. So where do you get your police policy? If you want to find out your police policy, you need to go to your city your city website. So here, I'm here in the city of Los Angeles. I want you to go to the city of Los Angeles, go to their website and look up the police department. The police department is a department within the city of Los Angeles. When you go to the police department, you want to look up what are their policies and procedures. This is public information. So if no matter where you are, Dr. Patterson is in New York. So you go to New York State, you look up police department and you can look up, you can go to the city of New York. You can go to your specific bureau and look up the policies of your police department. Now, remember, we always want to tie this back to money. You ready? Mr. Black purports that there should probably be a cap on traffic fines. He states that no city should have more than 5% of its policing budget based on traffic fines. So many of us know this. Many of us feel that time of the year where the police are writing ticket after ticket after ticket, and you're like, what is going on? Is this the quota season? Yeah, it's tied back to money. So that's one police reform that he talked about. Then he talked about military policing of the African American community. And if you don't get a chance to look at that, he states here, he said, by this policy, I'm going to back up a little bit. He says, from capping the amount of money departments can take in from writing tickets to making the use of force continuum more rigid, like the military. He says, by the policy, people are safer if it was the military, the US Army in the streets, then it would be the police in the way they use excessive force. So that's where I want to cap off our conversation. Our conversation tonight is geared around the excessive force of our police department. Now let's dive into our distinguished guests, because we want to talk about 8 can't wait. And 8 can't wait are 8 ways in which to reduce police violence. There are 8 reforms that was developed by the Police Use of Force Project. And so as we look at excessive force and the history of the police in the United States, so if you can go on any media and look at any video of the civil rights movement, you will see the police department using dogs, water hoses, batons. You will see great force used at peaceful protesters. That's 1965. Fast forward to 2020. Today we see what? Tear gas, bullets, what do you call those bullets?
Rubber bullets.
Blank bullets. Rubber bullets. We see dogs. If you follow me on Facebook, you see that I showed a video, I posted a video of the man was on the ground. After he's on the ground, hands behind his back, the police sick a dog on him, and they have no control over the dog. 3 people are shouting to them as this dog chews off the leg of a man, shoot the dog, shoot the dog, get the dog off his neck. The police then waited another 1 to 2 minutes to try to wrestle this dog off of this man's leg. That's 2020. That's not 1965. That's not 1945. So let's dive into this. The 8 can't wait. And I know our distinguished guests have read this. I want to hear from you. I want to hear your thoughts on 8 can't wait. Anyone jump in?
I wanted to interject really quickly a couple of things that you all have unfolded, which I'm grateful to hear the statistics. But my premise is, as well as Black Lives Matter, is that even before we can get to the 8 can wait, yes, it's good to put those things in place, but they already have policies, and they're not even abiding by those policies. And I know we want to unpack those, but just as you spoke about this systemic oppression that Black folks encountered and have encountered for the past 400 years. So when you talk about the slave patrol, this is 1850 is when this started, right? So we're talking about 170 years of some kind of an organized police force. I heard you say the early 1920s, they made it individual. But no, I was just saying that I'm grateful that you all have unpacked the statistical data that, stated, this historical reference of the police force. And we're talking about 170 years of basically the slave patrol. And as everyone stated and saying,
Kenyatta brought up a good point. It's here in this article, Democrats' new policy reform bill, the Justice in Policing Act of 2020. Here in this article published on June 28th, there is a starch reminder in this article that pressure for reforms in state and local governments is crucial. And they point out that almost all policing is done at the local and state level, not the federal level. There are nearly 18,000 law enforcement agencies in the US and a dozen or so at the federal level. So this is a local and a state level issue that every citizen has got to get involved in. This is not, the federal government is going to save us. They're not. It's not a federal government matter. Look at the statistics in the article. 18,000 law enforcement agencies in the US are governed at the local and state level. Only a handful, only 12 at the federal level. So if you're sitting at home and you're like, the Democratic Party is going to solve that, a little bit. But 99% of that is going to be solved in your local and state level. So we have got to get involved. I wrote an article about couch activism. Hearing something on the news and sitting on your couch. This is the time for you to get involved with the how. So now let's hear from our other distinguished guests. Can't wait.
Can I jump in here? So even before jumping into the can't wait, I want to touch on two things. One, I got the chance to hear Dr. Rashawn Ray from University of Maryland today on NPR, and he said something that blew me away. I'm gonna repeat it 2 times. He said, when you're dealing with systemic racism that is rooted within the police departments and systems of police departments across this country, we've always heard this notion of there's a couple bad apples, and bad apples don't ruin the bunch. Well, we're at the point now where we got to realize that we got bad roots that have produced bad fruit. And as Brother Shaw was saying, it's not a case of those bad apples have ruined the bunch. It's the fact that we got to uproot trees and plant new trees for law enforcement. We have to have new relationships with law enforcement, with our communities, and have to be able to define it. Now, going back to a point that you made about $1.8 billion being spent on by cities and municipalities to correct wrongs that were done by the police. The part that you did point out is, let's just go through a couple cities. $33 million in St. Louis, $50 million in Baltimore, $650 million in the city of Chicago since for the last 20 years.
Yes.
That money doesn't come from the police department.
No, it does not.
Taxpayer money.
Yes.
That means if we're going to systematically shift not just policy for what the 8 Can't Wait is pushing for, how we address or what the expectation we have for police officers as they're interacting with citizens, we also got to have the penalties connected to the individuals who are doing this. So a couple of proposals that I've seen that I think policy-wise could work is if we take more of a medical approach where doctors have medical insurance, similar to police officers could have the actual insurance that would cover the liabilities of things occurring, as opposed to taxpayers paying into it. This would have a dramatic effect on how police officers, police unions, which would be paying into the insurance system, would think about, can I allow misconduct to occur? Because now it's not the city is paying for it, it's actually coming out of my check. And if it's
Right.
coming out of my check, I'm more likely to care about it. And if it's going to be connected to money, we got to get out of the system of thinking that we're going to solve this and make people whole by paying them back with these lawsuits that come from the city, but recognizing that came from our taxpayers. That came from our money. That came from reason why we don't have enough school psychologists, enough school social workers, enough teachers, enough individuals working with young people to curb crime. It's because we're paying for it in different ways.
Exactly. And also, I agree with you, Dr. Ivy, that purport to make police officers carry their own liability insurance. But I also want to go one step further to that. Just like every other medical professional, tie that to a board of review. So that if you get one claim of misconduct against you, you go before the board. If you get enough, you lose your license. Game over. Game over. Now we don't have this good old boy network saying, I got qualified immunity. No, you have an independent board that looks at your policy and the number of infractions against you. And they say, guess what, Pumpkin? You're done here. We are revoking your license. And so then that would stop the police officers from going from police department to police department with a bad record. And that becomes public knowledge. Anybody can look up your record, your licensure. We do it in the medical field. And I love that was purported, but I'd like to take it one step further. Yes, Dr. Walker.
First I want to start by saying I really like that idea of them having their own insurance, because I feel like it just gives them more accountability, and it gets to be a point where you're just uninsurable. Like they're just not going to take you on anymore because you're too much of a liability. To say we've gotten to 1.8 billion, insurance companies are not willing to pay out 1.8 billion for the same people over and over and over again, the same 10% over and over and over again, because it's the same 10%, as we've been talking about in these statistics, the same 10% that are really causing the issue. So and I think that if you had insurance involved, insurance would definitely say, if you want to keep having insurance, then you need to get rid of these 10%. What we haven't discussed
is to find the entities that employ you. So it's just like hospitals, it's just like mental health clinics. If you insure somebody, they are also tied to your business insurance. And so that malpractice is not only for the practitioner, it's against your business. So now we have double accountability, because the person is going to receive accountability, but also the business that employs him or her. You're now taking on a high risk employee and your insurance is going up. Mm-hmm. I think that's a great, I really love that.
The second thing is, I think that there needs to be some way to tie it to the police unions, because really when we think about a lot of what's happening, it really has to do with the police unions blocking the things that have been put in place. So I think what Kenyatta, and I haven't seen her come back in, I think part of what Kenyatta was trying to say is that we've had policies in place. When you talked about from 1919 on, Dr. Kenneth Clark, who's a psychologist, many of you may have known him from the Dahl study, Brown versus Board of Education, right?
Right.
He talked about in 1967, we've had policies and commissions and committees over and over and over again. We've had suggestions that have been made over and over and over again. And he called it Alice in Wonderland. We're seeing the same things and the same inaction over and over again. Things happen, people get upset, there's rioting, people are saying the system needs to change. We get told, oh, yes, the system's going to change, things calm down, and things never get put in place. We've talked about qualified immunity. Well, even if the Supreme Court says that, yes, there's this qualified immunity needs to change, guess who has to sign off on that?
Right.
Number 45. How likely do we think that is that that's going to happen?
He's already tweeted that it's highly improbable to make it great again.
Right. So we're talking about we're talking about policies, and policies are great. And I think that 8 can't wait is important. I think that it's important to say, like, we need to have some minimum level of restrictions that kind of go across the country, or at least these things in place that kind of hold police to a certain standard and say that you should be using certain things before other things. So, can we find ways to de-escalate the situation first? Are there other things that we can do before we go straight to that? But I think that it's also important to realize that even when you have some of those things in place, what is the mechanism by which those things will be enacted? They're in place, they can be put in place in theory, and we can go on you can go on 8can'twait.org and you can see what your city is agreeing to do and what still needs to be agreed to happen. But then when they agree to it, are they just agreeing to it and giving lip service, or are they actually putting something behind that, put something on it?
Right. So I want to that's a great response, Dr. Walker. I want to take a moment and take us through the 8 Can't Wait website. If you go to the website, it will tell you that Campaign Zero was formed in 2015 by a group of activists and researchers with the goal of collecting and publicizing police department data and practices in order to understand how to significantly reduce police violence. And that all of those activities culminated into this report called the Police Use of Force Report. So if you go on their website, you'll be able to plug in your city. When you go to data on the right side, you look at your city, you scroll down to your city, and you'll be able to pull up your local police department's current policy. And you'll also be able to look at how to contact your mayor or your sheriff. That website is useful because I went there sometime, and I was able to pull up our police department interdepartmental correspondence on December 12th, 2019 by Michael Moore, who is the chief of police of Los Angeles. And this is in fact just a statement of our police excessive force policy. It does not give data, or if you pull up maybe your city reads a little different than mine, but mine just reads our actual it's titled Interdepartmental Correspondence. The subject is the policy on the use of force. So that was available to us, as well as how to contact our mayor and our sheriffs. But they also gave if you have a chance, download the Police Use of Force Policy Analysis. Now, this analysis was great. This analysis goes state by state and how they are implementing the 8 level of reform. So I want to back up, because we're talking about this as if our listening audience is aware of what's the 8 that can't wait. So let's name them for our listening audience. The 8 that can't wait are police reforms that 1, want to ban chokeholds and strangleholds. 2, require de-escalation. 3, require warning before shooting. 4, exalt all other means before shooting. 5, a duty to intervene and stop excessive force by other officers. 6, ban shooting at moving vehicles. 7, require the use of force continuum. And 8, require comprehensive reporting each time an officer uses force or threatens to do so. So that's the 8 by 8. And their website provides data on how effective it's been. But I think the most alarming is the grid that they put on page 1 of their website. And it goes state by state to show blue is yes, they're putting that reform in, and red is no, they're not putting that reform in. So if you go to just the front page of their website, Campaign Zero's website, you'll be able to look up how well your state is implementing the 8x8. How, because police departments are governed and their policies are created locally. Remember that 99% of police policies are created and governed locally. So this is an easy way of how. Print this out, contact your police chief and say, when are we going to implement the 8x8? This is an easy how to me. This is, can I print this out, attach it to a letter? I would like to see our police department implement the 8x8, sign it, put your name on it, and voila. Send it to your chief of police, send it to your mayor, send it to the chief of your sheriff's department.
The police commission.
The police commission, so that they see that you have the data. And then ask them, you can go on this website also and request a report of how they're doing. You can request a report of how they're doing. So if you have any questions, you can call our radio station and we'll send you this report. If you want to know how to get that done, we'll also walk you through it. If you're like, okay, I printed it out. What now I send a letter to who? Remember, send a letter to your police chief, to your mayor, to the police commission, to the sheriff's department. So let me clarify for our listening audience. You say, well, wait a minute, Dr. McNeil. First, we're talking about the police. Now you bring in the sheriffs. The sheriff department polices all unincorporated areas. So let me take my city, for example, Los Angeles County. Los Angeles County is huge. And so LA County has what we call unincorporated areas, meaning that LAPD is the major PD, and every city in LA County has their own police department. But what happens if you live in a city like I do, where we don't have our own police department? Then you would have the sheriff's office. You would have a sheriff's station in your area. Well, wait a minute, Dr. McNeil. Do the sheriffs police like the police? Yes.
Yes.
So you're going to need to contact them too. So we're talking about your local police department. And if you live in an unincorporated area, you know, people like to say we live out in the sticks. That's okay. If you live out in the sticks and you're in an unincorporated area, you need to contact the sheriff's department because they are the ones that are policing your community. So that's why you hear me saying contact your mayor, because the mayor governs all of that. Contact the chief of police, contact the sheriff, contact the commission, and then ask for a copy of the yearly report. Do you know, as a private citizen, you have the right to get a yearly report of an update, according to Campaign Zero, on how they're implementing the 8x8. So no, we're not powerless. No, we're not voiceless. No, we're not on the sideline. What we've got to do is pick up a pen and a piece of paper and get to work. So that's what I'm asking you to do. I'm asking you to pick up a pen and a piece of paper and get to work. Who is the chief of your police? Who is your mayor? Who runs your sheriff's department? Who's the president of your police commission? Write them. Tell them at the least, this is what I want in my community. And then send in a police report. All of that is public information. And when you don't get it, send in a letter of complaint. I never got my police report. I never got my update on how 8 Can't Wait is doing.
You know, Dr. McNeil, I'd like to jump in and add to the list.
Sure.
Your council person as well.
Oh, yeah.
So your council person works hand in hand with the mayor, and they have specific statistics that are to your area. So when you're writing to the mayor and you're writing to the council member, even your county board of supervisor representative, you can be very specific to your area. So when they're talking about how to implement reform, because some areas, as we all know, have more issues than others. So get your local city council person involved as well when you write.
And you also can, I'm sorry to interject, but I know we're going short on time. Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Okay, so with the public commissioners, with the police commission, the meetings are every Tuesday. They've been doing them by Zoom at 9:30 in the morning, and sometimes they do them on Wednesdays. They're not being consistent for one, but you can do a public comment. So a lot of people that are a part of Black Lives Matter have been going for the last 3 years to give public comments, because that's another way that you can hold them accountable and call them out specifically as things, come down the pipe as well. But I just really wanted to just kind of finish my comment. I know that you're going to move kind of quickly, but all of us spoke about, are they going to actually implement, right? So you showed how it was more red than it was blue of people that are implementing this 8 can't wait. And we know that they already have many policies in place of what they're supposed to do and not doing police brutality. But as we've spoken of, this system was built on systemic oppression and racism. And so for them, it is dollars and cents. And we know that the police are also given the charge of arrest and how many arrests they have to bring in, as far as quotas. So when we're talking about something that is a gain, we know that's why we have over 1 million people who are of Black descendants that are in the police or in the prison system. And if you read The New Jim Crow by Michelle Alexander, she talks about how that is the modern day way of slavery.
Yeah. 13 by Ava. You look at the movie. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Absolutely. But this is the charge to us. This is, when I say us, I'm African American. And when I say this is the charge to us, we have to stay diligent. We have learned from history. These moments have happened countless times in history. And what happens to us? I'm going to call it out. This is what's going to happen to us. They're going to throw a little bit of money at the Black community. They're going to say, oh. And then we're going to forget about it. We're going to go shopping. We're going to get our nails done. We're going to go to the party. But we've got to stay diligent. We need everybody. So you can say, Dr. McNeil, I'm not good at policing, but somebody in your community needs to be good at staying on top of the police. You may say, Dr. McNeil, I know I'm a nurse. I know medicine. Then you're a part of the group that stays on top of our medical community to make sure that we have enough, we don't experience health disparity. And you may say, Dr. McNeil, I can't keep up with policies and procedures. Then there's someone in the community that has to keep up with the policies and procedures. And you may say, Dr. McNeil, I don't want to run for public office, but there's somebody in the community that has to run for public office. You may say, Dr. McNeil, I don't want to keep up with finances. Or you may say, Dr. McNeil, I'm good with finances. Then you're the person in our community that keeps up with the finances. You're the one that comes back to us and tell us where they spent the dollars and the cents. I'm telling you, I'm pleading with you. We need everybody. Because when it boils down to just a few of us, the few get tired, the few get weary. And we are a strong community. We have not drawn weary in well-doing. But I am telling you, if we had a collective voice, if there were 1,000 of us writing letters every day to our police commission, it doesn't boil down to one person. It doesn't boil down to, if there were 1,000 Black doctors saying, hey, we have health disparity. If there were 1 million Black doctors saying we have a health disparity, let's deal with this. And all the time, we can't look to somebody else. This is the time where we hold up the mirror in our community and we look at each other. Because when we hold hands with each other, I'm telling you, we're powerful. I'm telling you, we're strong. I'm telling you, we're smart and intellectual, and we can come up with a strategy. We don't need to worry if we can do it. We have a proven history. Look at the civil rights movement. We don't need to worry if we can do it. Look at sharecropping. We overcame that and created Black Wall Street. We don't need to worry if we can't do it. So they burned down Black Wall Street. We said, hey, Rosewood, We don't need to worry if we can do it. They created Rosewood. We said we're going to diversify our wealth, and we created BT. We created other things. We don't need to worry if we can do it. But now I'm going to drop the bomb on you. I'm going to drop the mic before we have to drop the mic. But we've got to trust each other. I said it. Yeah. So oh my goodness, what a conversation, what a dialogue. I don't want you to miss our collective conversation here on More Radio Network. We're coming to you next Wednesday, same time, 6 p.m. And we're going to talk about, are you ready? The abolition or the defunding of the police. We're going to break it down. We're going to unpack it like we did tonight, so that everyone has an opportunity to understand the matter and know how you can get engaged. My name is Dr. Anissa McNeil, and you're listening to More Radio Network.